Hey everybody, Spacewizard here. Recently we've been seeing more Yogg-Saron than ever in competitive play, and consequently a lot of people have been noticing an apparent rise in RNG that has been a little controversial to say the least. So for this week's video, I'm going to be talking about Yogg-Saron's form, function, and my personal opinions on the card. Now, if you haven't already seen it, you should watch this clip from the America's Summer Preliminary. Dude7597 was playing Zoo against Monsanto's Token Druid and was in a very favorable position, but then Monsanto innervates out Yogg-Saron, casts 5 spells, pretty much clears his opponent's board, and simultaneously fills up his own board, completely turning the game around and ultimately winning him the series. So anyone that understands how Yogg-Saron works will understand that this was an extraordinary outcome, and Monsanto, in all honesty, probably didn't deserve to win this particular game. This is a rare situation where Yogg-Saron casted very few spells and got just about the best possible 5-card outcome he could have asked for. But I'd like to play devil's advocate for a moment and argue that this might not actually be nearly as disgusting as it seems. Yogg-Saron is a random card, and there are a lot of random cards in Hearthstone. Ragnaros, Sylvanas, and the various Discover effects are some of the more prominent ones, for example. Now, in function, I would argue that all of these cards are very similar to Yogg-Saron from a gameplay perspective. Ragnaros and Sylvanas will typically have at least one bad target on your opponent's board, and sometimes hitting a bad target with either can be the difference between winning and losing a game. Similarly, getting a good spell with Yogg-Saron can also be the difference between winning and losing a game. The key difference between a card like Sylvanas and a card like Yogg-Saron is their form, not their function. Whereas Sylvanas RNG only occurs once, Yogg-Saron casts a random spell multiple times in a row, and each time there's a large variance in outcomes. However, I don't think that particularly matters, and I think that most people are looking at this from a very limited perspective. We as players see Sylvanas activating once and Yogg-Saron activating multiple times, and we make a distinction. But at the end of the day, Yogg-Saron only has one total outcome. We're just seeing that one outcome split among all the spells he casts, and there's obviously much more variance in what Yogg-Saron can do compared to a card like Sylvanas that's really only in appearances. Statistically speaking, when you cast somewhere around 10 to 15 spells with Yogg-Saron, it is very likely that you will clear a good portion of your opponent's board, if not all of your opponent's board. Before Yogg-Saron was even released, we had simulators and calculations done that mathematically proved as much. It's very important that everyone realize each of Yogg-Saron's near-infinite outcomes is not equally as likely as the rest, and the way pro players use Yogg-Saron shows they understand this principle. You will almost never see a pro player use Yogg-Saron to build tempo or put themselves out of range of lethal or even try to set up lethal on their opponent unless they literally have no other option, because they understand Yogg-Saron is effectively a get-out-of-jail-free card. Statistically, he will clear the board and probably draw you a few cards. Other things can happen, but most of the time they won't. Now, depending on how accepting you are of RNG in Hearthstone, knowing that Yogg-Saron isn't literally pure chaos might not make a difference to you, but I have a case to make. A lot of people criticize Yogg-Saron, perhaps fairly, but does anyone criticize Raven Idol? Let's take a look back at that game between Dude7597 and Monsanto. Let's say that instead of Yogg-Saron, Monsanto had a Raven Idol in his hand and pulled a Starfall, then used it to almost entirely clear his opponent's board just like Yogg-Saron did. Now, obviously what Yogg-Saron ended up doing in the game was infinitely more effective than just pulling a Starfall off of a Raven Idol. After all, he built a board that ended up winning Monsanto the game, but let us not forget that Yogg-Saron deserves to be an infinitely more effective card than Raven Idol. He costs way more mana, he's legendary, you have to build your deck around him, and most importantly, there's a chance that he will just be bad due to the RNG involved. Conversely, Raven Idol has a much higher degree of control than Yogg-Saron, only costs 1 mana, can fit into any deck, and isn't legendary. But you still have just as much of a chance of getting a mediocre or amazing outcome with it as you do with Yogg-Saron. The difference is how the RNG is presented to you. When Yogg-Saron casts a Starfall, you got lucky. When you pick up a Starfall off of a Raven Idol, you're making an active choice in what card you get, but at the end of the day, there's some small percent chance that you were going to get that Starfall, just like there was some small percent chance that Yogg-Saron was going to cast a Starfall. For all intents and purposes, those other two cards might as well not even exist. You are never going to pick them, so what does it matter what they are? The RNG is still completely determining how the game is going to progress, and assuming you play perfectly, there's effectively only one outcome that's actually going to happen, you casting Starfall because that's the right choice. So what's the difference between casting Starfall yourself and Yogg-Saron casting Starfall for you? I'm not arguing that Discover doesn't feel a whole lot better than Yogg-Saron. Clearly everyone prefers Discover, but I think it's important to consider that maybe it isn't the function of Yogg-Saron's effect that everyone seems to dislike, but the form of his effect that's causing the controversy. That's it for this video, guys, but don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. This is the last video I'll be making on this channel, but there's tons of more good stuff coming next week, so until then, check out Hearthhead.com or either of its social media pages for all sorts of Hearthstone content. See ya, everybody.